Hi, I'm Vishva. I'm also an undergraduate at Ohio State. I'm a second year on the pre-med track, and today I'm going to be talking about my literature review that I did about the use of AI for dosha typing within the practice of Ayurveda. So this is my abstract to kind of give a general overview, but I'll just go right into the introduction. So I'm sure most of you know what Ayurveda is and a lot of minutiae into it, but just to break it down for you. Ayur means life and Veda means knowledge. So Ayurveda is literally the collection of knowledge about life and the body, right? So it makes sense how it's implemented as a medical system within the Indian principles. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about doshas within Ayurveda, which I'll go deeper into a bit later, but for right now you can think of them as kind of body types that Ayurveda categorizes people into. And the three main ones are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Now, my project, I tried to look at the dosha typing through the lens of artificial intelligence, and the three different strains of artificial intelligence that I looked through were predictive analytics, health monitoring, and personality profiling. So why combine the two? My reasoning for doing so is because I think we all know that Ayurveda has a lot of merit to it that the Western model of medicine could learn a lot from. And one thing that I think stands out in Ayurveda that I think the Western model lacks is personalized medicine. And for me, I think doshas were kind of like the first entry to understanding personalization of medicine within Ayurveda. And the reason why I wanted to bring AI into this is because I think Western society at large could benefit from this personalized outlook of medicine. But the way to bring something like Ayurveda and dosha typing to them is to bring it through more quantitative, empirical data, right? Because as Ayurveda is right now, we can't implement it as medicine because there isn't as much research in the West about it, right? So the way I would want to use AI is that I would want to find qualitative metrics that AI can predict patterns over to kind of categorize people within doshas through those quantitative metrics. And I think AI can help standardize Ayurvedic findings to make it easier to use on masses in the West, but also create a standard of care because as it is right now, Ayurveda is based in ancient texts, so we don't have as up-to-date research as, let's say, Western medicine. Doesn't mean there's not credit to it, there's a lot of value to it, but it just means that we've lost a lot of the original findings that we have. So if we create, AI can help kind of streamline all practitioners, so there's a standard of care. So if there's like a certain metric to reach for dosha typing, we can make sure that everyone's kind of practicing the art of Ayurveda in a similar manner so that everyone's receiving as effective of care as possible. So that's kind of the reasoning behind why I did this. So just to go into the basics of doshas really quickly, the doshas are made up of two mahabhutas each, which the mahabhutas are elements, Agni, Prithvi, Up, Akash, and Vayu. Now it's important to know that everybody's made up of all of these mahabhutas, it's just which ones are more prominent within your body type, right? The combination for Pitta is Agni and Up, Vata is Akash and Vayu, and Kapha is Up and Prithvi. Now, again, like mahabhutas, Ayurveda recognizes that we exist in multitudes and it's not so black and white. Everyone's not completely Pitta or completely Vata or completely Kapha, right? We have all of these doshas within us, but it's, again, just which ones are more prominent within your bodies. Ayurveda recognizes so much nuance that there's even sub-combinations of doshas. You can have two prominent doshas, or even all three, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So there's a lot to be discovered there. It's cutting off a bit of the slide, but doshas don't have to be thought of strictly as just body types. They can be thought of as body systems, right? For example, Vata can be encompassing all the body systems that control what goes in and out of the body. So that includes things like the respiratory system, membrane transport, things like that. Pitta covers things mostly relating to energy expenditure, so think digestion, right? And then there's there's Kapha, which mostly deals with energy storage. And you'll see that within each of the doshas, there's sub-doshas that represent kind of the individual body systems that fall under the umbrella of the doshas.
You can do it by manually there if you want, so that it shows the full slide.
I can help with that.
Oh, okay.
You focus on your speech, I'll control the.
Thank you.
No problem.
I do.
Next one?
Yeah. So now I want to kind of go into some of the characteristic traits of each dosha. Now, for the purposes of my research that I did, I focused on the main three ones, which are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And I wanted to just kind of quickly go through some of the phenotypic presentations that they have, which are called Prakriti. So starting with Vata, some of the typical presentations that they have are having a moderate metabolism, irregular digestion because their enteric system is not very stable, having a narrow frame, having dry hair, dry skin, high sensitivity to the cold, and some of their common risks of disease include neurological ones like dementia as well as arrhythmias. Now, those are some of the more physiological aspects of the Vata Prakriti, but there are some neurological aspects as well. In the research that I did, it showed that Vata are shown to have highly active prefrontal cortexes and highly active reticular systems. This means they have very quick thought processing, but also they forget things very easily. And on top of that, they have highly active sympathetic nervous systems. And so in our nervous system, we have an autonomic nervous system, which has two branches as well, which includes the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. The sympathetic is the fight or flight system that we go into when we're presented with a stressor, and the parasympathetic system represents our kind of baseline when there is no environmental stressor. And so the fact that Vata kind of has a highly active sympathetic nervous system, even when stressors aren't present, shows that they are generally at a higher state of arousal than maybe the other doshas are. They're also shown to have highly active amygdalas within their limbic system, which is the emotional center of the brain, and that shows that they have high fear responses as well. Moving on to the Prakriti of Pitta, some of their physiological traits include very active metabolisms. You know, that comes from like the Agni, the Tejas, that's why they have this strong digestion. They have medium frame, thin oily hair, sensitive to heat because they have high body temperatures. They have soft, acne-prone skin, and some of their disease risks include ulcers. As for some of their neurological characteristics, they're similar to Vata in that they have active prefrontal cortexes and reticular systems, but it's not all the time the same way Vata is. They can return to baseline when there's not stressors present, but the sympathetic system, the reticular system, prefrontal cortex, those all activate quite a bit when there's obstacles or challenges. Also, if their limbic system is active, it often presents in the form of aggression through their amygdala rather than a fear response the way Vata would. Lastly, Thank you.
I thought you were done.
No.
Sorry.
No. The typical physiological characteristics of Kapha include slower metabolism, lighter frame, thicker hair, kind of clear skin, but then some of their disease risks commonly include obesity and diabetes. As for their neurological differences, it includes kind of opposite to Vata and Pitta. They have lower reticular system activity and not as much sympathetic nervous system activity. It's mostly parasympathetic, and this manifests in a generally more calmer personality, and this is present in the limbic system as well, with their nuclear accumbens being active to, again, promote that more calmer personality. So that's kind of what makes up some of the key characteristics of the Kapha. Now, I mentioned earlier how Nadi Pariksha is kind of the traditional way that doshas were diagnosed in people. And the way it was typically done is that Ayurvedic practitioners would take 3 fingers and they would place it on the radial artery. This could be done on any arterial pulse point, but just in the research I did, they mainly discussed the radial artery. And they would take 3 fingers with the index finger closest to the palm, and each finger correlated to a different dosha. So index finger correlated to a vata, middle finger correlated to pitta, and ring finger correlated to kapha. And in general, what they were trying to do was find which finger they could feel the strongest pulse in, and that correlated dosha would be generally what the dosha of that person would be. Now, there's more nuance to it than that, because the pulse at each location was evaluated through 20 gunas, or characteristics of the pulse as well, to fully determine the dosha. Now, I also read a research paper that tried to find, of the 20 gunas, which ones are the most measurable and quantifiable. And that research paper found that the most quantifiable ones were gati, which is pulse movement, sthiraka, which is pulse rate variability, Kartinya, which is arterial stiffness, and vega, which is pulse wave velocity. All of these are quite measurable. I mean, like pulse wave movement is measurable, pulse rate variability. It's a newer metric that's still being studied, but it basically measures the difference in heart rate between each beat. Kartinya, arterial stiffness, the stiffness index already exists to measure arterial rigidity for things like plaque and things like that, so that can be measured. And pulse wave velocity, according to the paper that I've read, is most closely measured by dividing total blood flow by the time it takes for 1 pulse unit to pass. So with all of these quantifiable data points that can be used for Nadi Pariksha, I think this is one way research needs to head into if we want to take steps to integrating ourselves into medicine at large, because this can help bring a kind of more quantifiable standard that people can practice. As for the AI aspect of it, I first want to talk about AI and personality determination. So I already talked about earlier how the doshas, through their neurological differences, have some characteristic personality differences as well. And so I wanted to look at if AI can detect differences in personality. So I read a research article where essentially they were trying to assess the personality type of people through social media and then compare it against a typical test that they already do that's widely accepted in psychology that tests for the big 5 traits, which are openness, agreeableness, neuroticism, conscientiousness, and extroversion. And the idea is that everybody kind of falls on a scale for each of these traits, and together it can make a collective personality profile. And so what they found from comparing the AI to these test scores that are typically used is that extroversion and openness were the most accurate to find in AI, but overall it was not the most effective model to use. A more effective model that I found when researching was called conversational agents. Conversational agents is a type of AI mechanism that combines machine learning and natural language processing. Machine learning is kind of the most basic form of AI. That's when you input data without giving any explicit programming or instructions, and it just outputs basic patterns that it finds. Whereas natural language processing takes a more nuanced approach, because you can actually program it to look for patterns within linguistics. So not necessarily tone of speech, but verbiage that's used. And in the research that I did, conversational agents were used in doctor's visits and were used for many things, including triage and accounting for symptoms, but also for looking for behavioral changes within patients. And in my opinion, over time, after collecting data with multiple doctor's appointments, you could create a solid personality profile based on the big 5 using conversational agents. And the way I would integrate it with AI is I would create an with Ayurveda is that I would create an operational definition for the doshas using the big five. So we, like I said, the doshas have some characteristic personality traits through their neurological differences. So the big five could be used to kind of define them through the lens of modern psychology in the West. And then conversational agents could be programmed to detect those specific big five traits and then categorize people based on where they fall on the dosha based on those traits. The next stream of AI I want to look at was AI and health monitoring. So the conversational agents that I mentioned were used for health monitoring because they were used during doctor's appointments to track symptoms that were stated and things like that. But another form of health monitoring that a lot of us are already familiar with is wearable health monitoring devices, things like Fitbits, Apple Watches, Oura Rings. Those are tools that use AI to track a lot of vitals. And a research study I read showed that most of these wearable health monitoring devices mostly measure for things like heart rate, respiration rate, movement patterns, and sleep patterns. And a lot were actually shown to help track sleep apnea. And the AI that goes behind these wearable devices is convolution neural networks, support vector machines, and random forests, which random forests are used to kind of look through all possible outcomes to predict what could be the prediction. And so to combine AI with Ayurveda for monitoring, wearable devices could be useful for collecting longitudinal data over time. I think using these devices to collect things like heart rate and respiration rate over time could create a solid baseline for people to determine what kind of the base range for these different vitals is. And since we already have like the different physiological traits that I mentioned at the beginning, along with a lot more that I didn't even mention, these devices could help track those things and then once again categorize people into the dosha based on those long-term vitals. And the thing about these monitoring devices is they're very convenient to use. It makes monitoring one's own statistics and data very accessible because people don't have to check themselves into facilities. They can just use the devices already on their wrist. So it empowers patients to take hold of their healthcare, and it also just creates better longitudinal data. The last stream of AI I want to talk about was AI and predictive analytics. And this is probably the stream of AI that's been used most and implemented the most in current healthcare. And for predictive analytics, it's important that people use deep learning over machine learning. That's an important distinction that I read they make. Machine learning is often too basic for the healthcare needs that AI would be used for, whereas deep learning, it can actually be programmed to look for specific patterns. And for predictive analytics in specific, a lot of what they're using predictive analytics for right now is for imaging. So things like RAGCNs can determine bone age in CAT scans. And then LabNets can identify regions of interest most prone to lesions, which is good for early diagnosis of diabetic retinopathy. But in general, this predictive analytics model mostly works for imaging, so it mostly works for diseases that can be gone through scans. So like it's been shown to be effective for early diagnosis of cancer and things like that. Because of that, right now it might be hard to combine the use of predictive analytics with Ayurveda because it mostly looks at only diseases that are very long-term and again, can only be seen through scans. And that doesn't necessarily encompass all of the disease risks that people talk about are present for each dosha. And if we were to use this in the future for Ayurveda, it would require a lot more extensive research into predictive analytics outside of imaging for it to be actually useful for the everyday. I also quickly wanted to mention the Nadi Darangini. So while I was doing my research, I came across this device, which actually combines a lot of the research points I was talking about before. So this is a device that has been created that uses the typical principle of Nadi Pariksha, but it's made a device out of it that essentially tracks different qualities of the pulse, including some of the quantifiable measures of the pulse that I mentioned earlier, like Gartinian's Stevata. And all of this together help, including other things that they use to qualify the pulse, helps them decide one's dosha. And now this device goes a step further because it also compares the quality of one's pulse to that of a pulse that is going through like around 6 different ailments. So it can diagnose people with current sicknesses that they're going through at the time. But one critique I will say of this device came out in 2007. It hasn't taken off yet as much because they still need more AI usage. They mentioned in the paper that they use that more AI usage would be able to detect more patterns within people, but of course that requires more data as well. And another critique that I have is that I think we need to focus more on longitudinal data. I think that's the way to also implement it more into the current medical model in the West, because like once-off data, that can change day to day based on environmental changes, or maybe you're just not feeling as well, which I'm sure, like it says, it accounts for, but not completely. So I think this is a really probably like the closest that any of the ideas that I mentioned previously have come to fruition, but I think more longitudinal ideas need to be taken forward in research to actually be implemented into medical standards in the West. And then of course, when talking about AI, you have to mention the drawbacks that come with it, especially when talking about healthcare. Patient privacy is, of course, very risky because it can very easily get compromised. Of course there's HIPAA laws, but with AI, it's kind of a whole new domain, and people may not know where their data is going to, and if it's going to AI that may be using a lot of just random health records that it has access to, maybe even within the hospital, to create quality data. That maybe the patient did not consent to that, and it's happened without their knowing. It's kind of risky to do that. And then on top of that, AI requires a lot of data. And right now, of course, people are very averse to giving up their data to AI, rightfully so, but that means that AI can't make as accurate results because AI is completely derivative of the information you put into it. So if it's not getting quality or high quantity of information, it's not going to create safe, accurate predictions or results that should be implemented right now. And then of course, when talking about AI used for any large project, you can't ignore the environmental concerns that come with that. AI requires a lot of environmental resources, including a lot of water, and they let off a lot of greenhouse gases, so that's a big consideration to take in when considering if the benefits outweigh the costs. And so in conclusion, essentially, I do think there's a future of using AI to help determine doshas within Ayurveda. I do think there needs to be more research, and more research with quantifiable metrics in tandem with actual Ayurvedic principles. Because right now, whatever I was able to glean was mostly like separate Western kind of clinical studies and comparing them against the kind of classic Ayurvedic principles that we know, but they actually need to be combined for us to make any solid conclusions that can be implemented in the future. But if more research is headed in that direction, I think there is a future for bringing AI to the mainstream and bringing essentially personalized medicine to the West, which is, I think, a very important and helpful thing to do. I just want to thank Dr. Rupali Banse. She was an Ayurvedic practitioner that I referred to anytime I had gaps in knowledge. She helped me with a lot of different informational gaps that I have, so she was really helpful. And this is my citations. Thank you.